Hi, my name is K.Thomas, W1DED. Today I have with me WD4DAN, Dan Muntz. Dan has been very involved with Parks on the Air, well, at least since I've been involved a year ago. I don't know how long before that. And he's both activating but also hunting, and that's really why I asked him to be here today. Dan, thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you for having me, Kev.
So let's start at the beginning. How did you get started with ham radio to begin with?
An Elmer of mine in the mid 90s introduced me to it. He was the local trustee for the repeater system here in town, and I got interested in it. I got my first ticket in 1997, I would say, and was really involved with the VHF scene, 2-meter 440. Took care of the local repeaters here in town with a friend of mine, and then I don't know why, just lost interest. It's almost like somebody flipped a switch, and didn't really get back into it until COVID. And I mean, that seems like the common theme with a lot of people. They needed something to do during COVID, and while we were locked down here at the house and basically working from home, so I got back into it, and still as a technician at that time, technician no code, and I was on 10 meters strolling around, and I heard somebody calling CQ POTA in my little section of the 10-meter band that I could run. And I was like, what is this POTA stuff? So I started looking into it, and I said, I really need to get my general because this looks like a lot of fun. So got my general probably about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and the rest is history.
So you commented that it was at the beginning of COVID. So are we talking 2021, early 2021?
Yeah, about 2021 is when I started to get back into it. Had to find something for my off time, being stuck at the house and locked down and not physically being able to go to work. It's like I need to find something else to do rather than just eat and sleep and work.
Well, I can totally relate. And again, if anybody's watched these videos, they've heard the story 1,000 times. So I probably shouldn't tell it again. But I was licensed first in the late 70s, and then my life took me in a different direction. And it was during COVID that I decided I needed to relicense. I'd let my license lapse, and I'd hauled gear around for 40 years. And of course, I didn't use any of that. I had to go out and buy new stuff because I wasn't spending any money during COVID. So I needed some place to spend a couple $100. But the very first thing I got into was Parks on the Air. So tell me about that experience. Was Parks on the Air something you got involved with as soon as you got back on the air?
Pretty much as soon as I got back on the air, because I first heard it on 10 meters, like I said, in my little section of the band that I was allotted to as a technician. And luckily, there were activators out there on that section of the band for me as a technician at the time to hear it. And that's one of the reasons when I go out and activate, I try to at least spend at least 30, 45 minutes in that little section of 10 meters. Just if I can, catch a technician and maybe spur them on to, you know, get that upgrade and get on the other HF bands. That'll be.
So I am anxious to talk about your hunting, but let's talk about activations for a second. What does that typically look like for you? Are you there for a while? Are there multiple QSOs, or are you just getting the 10 to activate the park and move on to another place? What's your style?
It really depends on what I'm doing. If I'm going park to park to park, I try to get 13 to 14 minimum, just in case I bust a call sign. I don't want to have any issues with that. And but mainly it's go to a park and I'm there for a couple hours. And I don't feel accomplished personally unless I leave with 150, 200 QSOs. So I try to make that about my average. And in my home park here, I kind of tear it up on the weekends.
So that's fantastic because I happen to relate to that. When I go to a park, I tend to be driving quite a distance now, and I want to get at least 100 QSOs. If I can't do the 100, I feel like I've not done well. And sometimes, the conditions just don't work out well or I need to move on to some other place. But after I go through all the setup and getting there, making 100 QSOs feels better. But also what I found is if there are people that are responding to my CQ, I don't want to stop. It just doesn't seem right if people are trying to get the park. So sometimes that dries up and I move on. But typically if people are still calling and a lot of people still need Maine for their work 12 states, then I hang in there as long as I need to.
I have a hard time with that as well. If I need to get out of the park, like if I have something else to do and I say QRT, I have to actually force myself to hit the power button to the radio. Because if I don't, even after I say QRT, if I hear somebody call, I have to go out. I have to work them.
I had one situation on the coast of Maine. It was, I think it was Moose State Park. Not unusual for state of Maine, but I got there late and they were closing the park early, and I had a lot of people calling, including DX, and I cut it as close as possible so that I was packed up and leaving as they were swinging the gate closed. So I can totally relate. What do you use for equipment, Dan, when you're doing a setup?
Mainly it's a Yaesu FT891 with an external tuner and the Eagle One antenna, which is a random wire vertical. Basically tune anything from 6 to 80 easily. Sometimes 160 you can get depending on how it's acting. Other than that, sometimes I bring ICOM 7300 out, depending on how long I'm going to be, what I want to do. And that's basically the gear. If I did a QRP activation because I told a friend of mine on Discord that I would, and I mistakenly opened my mouth and said, I'll get at least 200 QSOs during this QRP activation. So I stayed out there for a better part of 5 or 6 hours getting that done, but we got it done.
Yeah, I'm envious of people like yourself that have a wire that can have maximum flexibility on the bands. That's not what I've enjoyed. I've sort of been using a body pole quite a bit, and in order to switch bands, I need to reconfigure, and that just isn't where I really want to be. So I've been fooling around with a DX Commander Expedition that I can set up for multiple bands. It's a lot of work to get it set up, but as I found that the more I use it, and particularly if I'm going to be there for a couple hours, it's worth the time and the investment. I haven't thrown a wire up in a tree yet, but that's down the road.
I have the Signature 12.4 at the house, so it's a very, very good antenna.
So you've mentioned where you're from. Well, you haven't mentioned where you're from exactly. So you're in Georgia, I believe, correct?
Very South Georgia. I'm about 22 miles north of the Florida border off of I-75, so I might as well be in North Florida. So I'm basically South Georgia, North Florida. So.
And what is the park situation in that area? Do you have a number that you can reach relatively easily?
Not very well. Just south of the Florida border, there's a whole string of them. I mean, there's probably 20 you can reach down in Florida very quickly from here. In Georgia itself, my home park is about a half an hour away, and the nearest state park is about an hour. And they're pretty sparsely populated here.
So is that one of the reasons that you tend to do a lot of hunting?
It is, and the job keeps me basically confined to doing activations just on the weekend, just for the time schedule.
So you work from home?
Sometimes I have the flexibility to work from home when I need to, which is nice. Most of the time I do go into the office now, though.
So I'm always curious, maybe you don't want to say this on the air, but when you're working from home, do you have your rig turned on beside you?
Oh, absolutely.
Nice.
Doesn't everybody?
I certainly have. It was great during COVID when I was working 100% from home, and I still work a lot from home, but I'd have my computers on and doing my work, and my rig was about 10 or 11 feet away, and I just watched the POTA spotting page, head over, grab a call. It was a lot of fun. I've sort of got away from that habit lately, but I need to get back into it. So tell me about hunting. What do you use for gear at home? Are you using the 891 or a different rig?
For home, I have an ICOM IC 7610, and my main transmit antenna most of the time is an inverted V, the ZS6 BKW, the G5RV spinoff. The apex of that in the inverted V configuration is up about 85 feet into a pine tree. So it talks very well. My other transmit antenna, like I said, is the DX Commander Signature 12.4. And what I like about the 7610 is I can actually use both VFOs in a dual watch configuration and listen to two different antennas. I have a loop on ground receive antenna that I recently did a couple months ago. That's strictly for receive, and that has opened up my world tremendously. I can hear a lot of stations now that I can't hear on either of the other antennas, so it really helps me out hunting.
That's really impressive. So tell me about hunting for you. Are you dedicating several hours to it, or are you bouncing back and forth when you see things on the spotting page?
A little bit of both. I sit down after work and I hunt the spot page, the ones I can hear, and I run through them, and then I might go do something else with the family and then come back and see what's new on the spot page. And my favorite activators I have in ham alerts, and sometimes our Discord channel will alert out. So if those get online, I'll run in here and work them real fast. So.
And who are they? Who are your favorite operators?
Let's see. In my ham alerts, I have K8 PZN James, which is a top activator. Carrie, KB3WAV. I have Todd and Chandra out of North Georgia, and a slew of others that I have in there.
So I've been around those pileups for several of those people, and they're pretty big and somewhat tough to break through. But that's one of the things that Jim Garman had said in his email, that somehow you seem to have the ability to break through a lot of these pileups. What do you think that's related to?
Timing is the biggest thing if you want to break a pileup. If you see it's busy, the number one thing is listen, listen, listen. See how the activator is working. If he's always stationed beginning with whatever, he's probably listening to the front of the pile. If he's always asking station ending delta again, he's probably listening to the tail end of the pile more. So just figure out what the activator is doing and listen to that. And always call the same way. If you have a certain tone in your voice, the activator, if you work them enough, they'll pick up on that tone. They might not know it's you calling per se, but the tone will be familiar and they'll be able to.
That's one of the tips that I've gotten pretty consistently about contesting. Once you get to know the call signs and you have that rhythm, that people will pick up your call sign quicker because they'll fill in the blanks, and vice versa. You'll be able to, if you're out in the field or in the contest, you're calling CQ, you'll be able to pick up that call sign a little bit quicker just because you, and I'm finding that to be true already. I could just hear one or two letters and I recognize the voice. And I also appreciate when both activators and hunters, in the case of Parks on the Air, have a certain rhythm to their operating. It's easier, I think, then to be responsive to that rhythm. The people that are a little bit more scattered, it's a little bit harder to figure that out.
The main tip, if you want to be a consistent hunter and have that consistent first call to activators to always be able to recognize you better, rather, is to not key the mic and say your call sign, because you're going to say it different every time. Actually put it on one of your voice recordings and hit it that way. It's the same way every time, and the activator will get used to that. So that saves your voice. You don't have to say your call sign 100 times a night. So.
Is there any particular style that you prefer when you're talking about activators and getting used to their style? Is there? You don't need to mention the specific operator, but what kind of style do you prefer that people?
I prefer the quick ones. Just give me my signal report, state. I'll give you my signal report, state, in and out, and run them one by one. That way I don't have to hang around and wait. I don't mind if you run a list as long as you run it efficiently. Don't take like 45 call signs and try to go back through them all, because I get impatient rather quickly. And but I prefer the one call at a time.
So Dan, are you into contesting? Because it seems as though you have the skill set to do that.
I first got hooked in contesting back in the late 90s at my first field day. And ever since then, it's I like the fast pace. I like the get as many as you can in the short amount of time as you can.
So what do you think of this new Parks on the Air event, the plaque event, that isn't really a contest, but it's built, it looks like a contest, but I guess it's not. How do you feel about that?
I think it's great. I think it's a great thing they do that. If you're working in a twofer, you're only going to get credit for one QSO to that twofer. I think that was a big equalizer. I would be definitely more inclined to participate in it because of that.
So do you plan on activating or hunting?
Probably activating. I'm going to do a little bit of both, but I'm going to focus on the activating. I'm not going to get any kind of awards for hunting because all my focus is going to be on activating that weekend.
So tell me about that. Do you have any specific plans yet?
Just to work one park and get the most I can on as many bands as I can.
So do you think you'll maximize the hours?
I hope so. It all depends on how it is. I mean, we can say I'll stay out there, all the time, but if the bands are, not up to par, then you got to work with what you got to work with.
But that's your intent. Your intent is to go on Friday night and hang in there until Sunday night.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm asking all this because I haven't figured out my plan yet. It's uncertain as to whether or not I'll put in a few hours. Last year, I put in a couple hours on Saturday, a couple hours on Sunday, back when it was Support Your Parks weekend. But I'm trying to figure out this
it's the same thing. The Georgia Support Your Parks weekend is this weekend, April 1st and 2nd, where all of the state parks in Georgia are going to be activated, and there's a schedule for that. And I will be at Reed Bingham State Park. I can't remember the kilo number off the top of my head. And hopefully we'll get every state park in Georgia activated. So if anybody needs a park in Georgia still on your hunted list, it'll be a great weekend to get that done.
That's really impressive. So who's coordinated that effort?
I am not really sure. GeorgiaGAParks.org has all the information about schedules and who's going to be where. I might not be using my own call sign. I did apply for Whiskey 4 Delta 1x1, so I'll probably be using that one.
And how many parks is that, roughly? State parks?
Oh, I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
That's okay. I'll look it up.
Good question.
It's pretty impressive that you're able to do that. And it's also impressive that you have that many parks on the air operators that can activate. We don't have that many people here in Maine that are activating on a regular basis.
I think the Florida State Parks activation weekend is the same weekend as well. So it might be a little bit of double barrel shotgun load for you there.
What was the last contest you ran in, Dan?
I did a little bit of the WPX this last weekend. I didn't do enough to make my brain implode. I basically did more search and pounce than run. So didn't get many, maybe 50 or 60 just to dip my feet into it.
Yeah, I also participated this past weekend. I'm still trying to catch up on my sleep. And I didn't operate as many hours as I should have. I think I operated about 31, and the max would have been 36. And I regret not using those additional 5 hours.
That's still a very respectable amount for sure.
Yeah, it was tough. It was interesting. So Dan, tell me overall your thoughts on Parks on the Air, where you'd like to see it go in the future.
I think the program right now is excellent. What it's doing for ham radio, I don't think's ever been done in ham radio. Like I said, there was a period of many years that I'd never even turned on a radio. It definitely is putting interest back into ham radio, and I think that's a great thing. I definitely put my interest back into it. So hopefully it'll get a lot more people on the air, and not just, the old people like us, get more of the younger generation up and have them do the same thing.
Well, I'm definitely a lot older than you. Let's make that clear right away. I think you're one of the young guys. Now, Dan, I know you have an IT background, and because of that IT background, we were talking before I turned the recording on that you have a certain level of respect for what Parks on the Air has done with their system. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, just knowing that they have a stable enough back end to deal with the basically exponential growth that they're having right now. A lot of new parks are being added overseas, and they're getting a lot of the more DX entities on the map and everything else. And to have that stable platform on the back end really says a lot. The team's done a great job.
As an IT person, what would you like to see improve in the future?
Really, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Everything's pretty streamlined. Sometimes when there's 80, 100, 120 spots over the weekend on the spotting page, it gets a little bit sluggish, but it is what it is.
And what about data? Do you think they provide the data you need and the data you want to crunch?
Yeah, I guess there's always room for more awards. I think a lot of the awards now are geared towards activators. There are hunter only awards. Excuse me, a lot of the awards are geared towards the hunter now, but they're working more activator type awards. Of course, there's a lot of them, but it'll be nice to see some unique stuff.
And Dan, I know that you've hunted. Speaking of statistics, you've hunted somewhere around 3,200 parks. That's an amazing number. And where does that place you on the leaderboard?
Overall, I'm not sure. But I looked at the other day, the time between the hunter awards I got, because those are every 500 parks you get a new level. And I was averaging about 500 new to me parks about every month and a half. And I know that's kind of diminishing returns. After a while, it's going to slow down. But when I hunt, I load the spot page and I go through them. The new to me parks, I always hit first. Then the new to me parks for this calendar year, I hit first. And then the rest of them. But I do try to hit every one of them I can hear anyway.
I love that you have a system. Dan, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today, and I'm glad to have you in my log. We've talked a couple times. I need to get back out so we can get a couple more.
Yeah, it's always good to work you on the air and hear you, man.
Did you happen to work me while I was down in the Caribbean? I can't recall if I got you in the log that time. It was the J8NKI call.
Yes, 4 times.
Yeah, that was an interesting experience activating down in the Caribbean, because I thought that I was going to just put a lot of U.S. and Canadian POTA hunters in the log, and they end up competing with a lot of DX callers. So it was tough. I would spot or get somebody to spot me on the POTA page, and I typically would have 10 or 15 minutes, maybe not even that much, where it was typically the U.S. and POTA hunters, and then the DX from Europe would come in, and it was game over as far as that goes. But
Yeah.
well, Dan, thank you for talking to me today. I really appreciate it. I've been talking to Dan Muntz, WD4DAN. You'll see him on the POTA spotting page. It sounds like you'll also be able to hear him during the Parks on the Air Plaque Event weekend. Look for him.
Thank you very much for having me, Kevin.
Thank you, Dan.